You know, some men are obsessed with chasing power. Others, they run for the hills the second things start to fall apart. But then you have the ones who stay. The ones who stick around even when defeat is a sure thing, and history itself is turning on them. This is the story of one of those men, General Rodolfo Graziani.
And that's really the big question here, isn't it? Why would someone stay loyal when the whole world is crumbling around them? Was it some sense of honor? Was it just fear? Or was it a kind of loyalty so total, so absolute, that it turns into something much, much darker? To get Graziani, we have to try and answer that. You see, Graziani's story doesn't really start with World War II. Long before the world was at war, he was already making a name for himself, and not in Europe, but in the deserts of Africa, as the go-to enforcer for Mussolini's new empire. His entire career was basically built on one brutal colonial campaign after another. First, it was in Libya, back in the 1920s. Then he was leading the invasion of Ethiopia in 1935. And these weren't just wars in the traditional sense. They were campaigns designed to crush and suppress, and they would come to define him completely. His playbook was pretty clear. When he was in Libya, facing this fierce resistance, he didn't try to negotiate. He just unleashed total war. We're talking mass deportations, vicious reprisals, tactics designed not just to win, but to completely shatter the will of his enemies to ever fight back.
And that is exactly why Mussolini valued him so much. See, Mussolini didn't just want generals, he wanted true believers, men who would do whatever it took without question. Their relationship wasn't some kind of friendship. It was built on a shared belief in absolute brutal force. Graziani got results, and for Mussolini, that's all that mattered.
But if there was one event that really cemented his reputation for brutality, it was this one. In Ethiopia, there was an assassination attempt on his life. The response that followed was just horrifying. A wave of mass reprisals tore through the city, killing thousands of people. The message couldn't have been clearer. If you resist, you will be met with overwhelming, indiscriminate violence.
So with this incredibly fearsome reputation, Graziani steps onto the stage of World War II. He was basically the poster boy for fascist strength and discipline. But his first big test against a major world power, well, it would turn into an absolute catastrophe.
It's 1940, and he gets the top job, command of the all-important North African Front. This was a huge deal, a real test of Mussolini's imperial dreams. Everyone expected Graziani to pull off another of his swift, brutal victories.
But it just didn't happen. His invasion of Egypt stalled out. And then the British hit back. And they hit back hard. Their counteroffensive was called Operation Compass, and it completely blindsided the Italian forces.
The result was a total disaster. The Italian defenses just melted away. Entire divisions were wiped out, and thousands upon thousands of soldiers were taken prisoner. For the very first time, Graziani's image as this unstoppable force was completely shattered. He had failed. Big time.
So what do you do then? You've been publicly humiliated, your army is in tatters. Most people would try to distance themselves from the regime, right? Try to save their own skin? But Graziani? His answer to that was a very simple, very firm no. As the war really started to turn against Italy, a lot of people in power were looking for the exit door. But for Graziani, this is where his story takes its most defining and, frankly, its most shocking turn. The year is 1943. Italy is collapsing. The Allies have landed on the mainland, and Mussolini himself has been thrown out of power. The whole fascist system that Graziani had dedicated his life to was just imploding. The logical move here, the smart move, was to survive. Switch sides, go into hiding, do whatever it takes. But when German commandos rescued Mussolini and set him up as the leader of a puppet state in northern Italy, Graziani made his choice. He actually accepted the job of Minister of Defense. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. At the very moment when the war was undeniably lost, he chose to stay. He chose to try and raise an army for a shadow government that had absolutely no future. It was just this act of pure, unshakable loyalty to a man and an idea that were already dead and buried. And that decision would seal his fate. There was going to be no quiet retirement for him, no slipping away. The consequences of his entire life were finally catching up with him. And the end came really fast. The Axis powers in Europe fell apart. Mussolini was caught and executed by Italian partisans. And Rodolfo Graziani?
He was captured by the advancing Allied forces.
When he was put on trial, the prosecutors didn't just talk about his failures in World War II. Oh no, they brought up everything that came before. His actions in Libya, the reprisals in Ethiopia, his entire career as an imperial enforcer was laid bare for the world to see.
And this really gets to the heart of his story. You know, we think of loyalty as this noble thing, but what happens when it binds you to something so awful that you can never escape it? For Graziani, it wasn't a virtue, it was a chain. And in the end, that was the simple, disturbing truth of his life. He never wavered, not when his armies were destroyed, not when his leader was overthrown, and not even when his own life was on the line. His loyalty was absolute, right to the bitter end.